All right, we are on Unit 7, Learning Target 1, which is about the physical features of South and Central Asia and how they affect human settlement patterns. We're going to be taking a look at, there's actually 3 areas here, 2 in Central Asia and 1 in South. The first one, Central Asia, you can see is landlocked, and here's a vocab word right off the bat. Landlocked means that it is cut off from direct contact with any ocean. Minnesota, for example, is landlocked. Traveling across this region's mountains and deserts is a challenge, yet for thousands of years, farmers have survived in the rich mountain valleys. Nomads have grazed their herds on the vast, mostly flat grasslands. The third region is the Caucasus Mountains, which they are near the Caucasus Mountains that run between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. 3 countries make up this region: Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. South Asia is found in the south of the Himalaya Mountains. This land is called the Indian subcontinent, and that's a vocab word. The Indian subcontinent is just what it is. It's India. In the past, this subcontinent was connected to Africa. Then about 90 million years ago, so just recently, this huge chunk of land broke away and drifted to the northeast, and as the landmass collided with Asia, the pressure caused the ground to buckle up, and that's how the Himalayas were formed. Speaking of the Himalayas, let's move on to landforms. And our first landforms are mountains and highlands. We're going to start back in Central Asia again. We see the Caucasus Mountains. The Caucasus Mountains, like I said before, run between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And you can see that Russia is north of the Caucasus Mountains. On the eastern edge of Central Asia lie the Tian Shan Mountains of Kyrgyzstan and the Pamirs Mountains of Tajikistan. And then we talked about already the Himalayas that form India's northern border. They surround nearly all of Nepal and Bhutan, and smaller ranges such as the Hindu Kush. They extend the Swell Mountains into western Pakistan and central Afghanistan. The southern part of Asia is a peninsula. Like I said before, it was the subcontinent. It juts out into the Indian Ocean. Much of this peninsula is a fairly flat highland area called the Deccan Plateau. It is bordered by 2 coastal mountain ranges, the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats. A very original naming going on there. And then off the southern tip of India lies the island nation of Sri Lanka. And then to the southwest of that are the Maldives, the chain of almost 2,000, or actually just over 1,100 islands that are formed out of coral. All right, let's move on to the flatlands. The first one is the steppe, and that's a vocab word. Steppe is mostly flat grasslands, and you can find that in Kazakhstan, and they lie to the northwest of the mountains. The plains of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan spread west from the Tian Shan and the Pamirs Mountains to the Caspian Sea. All right, and deserts, we have 2. The Karakum Desert covers about 70% of Turkmenistan, and the Kizilkum Desert is north of the Karakum in northern Uzbekistan and southern Kazakhstan. All right, now let's move on to waterways, mostly rivers here. Melting snow in the Tian Shan and Pamirs Mountains feeds rivers and lakes throughout Central Asia. Mighty Sir Darya and the Amu Darya rivers flow west from the mountains. Waters from these rivers run into the Aral Sea between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Rainfall is scarce because it's an arid and semi-arid climate. So this mountain source, that's a vocab word, a source of water is important to Central Asia. The source is where it begins. Let's go into Southern Asia, or South Asia. Large rivers drain the melting snows off the mountains here as well. To the south of the Himalayas, the Ganges River runs through India's northern plains and meets the Brahmaputra River in Bangladesh. In the west, the Indus River flows through the dry plains of Pakistan. All right, let's move on to natural resources. We're going to start with agriculture. Raising livestock is important in Central Asia. Remember, livestock are animals. Herders have long grazed their flocks on the steppes. In mountain areas, herders bring their animals to graze in high mountain meadows in the summer when there's no snow, and then they go back to the lower plains in the winter. This protects the grassland and prevents, and here's a vocab word, it's overgrazing, which is just what it sounds. It's that so much grazing occurs that the plants are killed. And then if we move to South Asia, Many of them also work in agriculture. Farms tend to be small. And here's another vocab word. They're mostly engaged in subsistence farming, which means that they grow just enough crops to feed their families and have little left over to send to market to sell. Let's look at oil and minerals. Central Asia first here has many resources, including minerals, oil, and natural gas. These natural resources are not evenly distributed. And as you can guess, those with natural resources are better off than the ones who do not. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan produce the most natural gas. Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan produce the most oil. Several countries in Central Asia are rich in oil. The medieval Italian explorer Marco Polo, no, he did not invent the pool game that you play, described an oil seep probably in what is now Azerbaijan. Central Asia also has important mineral deposits. For example, Armenia has copper, lead, and zinc. Gold is mined in Kyrgyzstan, and exporting these minerals plays an important part of their economies. But since many of the countries in Central Asia are landlocked, transportation is a challenge. Oil and gas exports must move through pipelines. One of Azerbaijan's pipelines runs through Georgia, where oil is then loaded onto ships in the Black Sea. Another pipeline brings oil to Russia. Until 2006, all of Kazakhstan's pipelines ran through Russia, which gave Russia a lot of control. Recently, however, China helped build a pipeline from Kazakhstan into the west of China. Southern Asia is also rich in resources. Rivers provide hydroelectric power. Mines in the plateaus and mountains produce iron ore, bauxite, coal, and copper. And petroleum and natural gas are found in the plateaus and mountains, as well as offshore. These resources support manufacturing in India and Pakistan. And our last natural resource is water. Water is also unevenly distributed, unfortunately. This is an important issue, especially in Central Asia where it's dry. Water there comes mainly from the mountains in the east. If the countries upstream use too much of the water, the countries downstream lose out. In 1997, Uzbekistan blocked part of the water flowing into Kazakhstan. Farmers in Kazakhstan feared their crops would die, and they held a riot. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have built dams along rivers to make electricity. However, too many dams could threaten the water flow to their neighbors. Water shortages of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan could become worse, and the countries in this region must cooperate to transport and benefit from the resources. All right, let's look at climate. The first one is arid and semi-arid. The climate of Central Asia is mostly dry. Most of Central Asia has an arid or semi-arid climate. Weather is hot during the summer, and agriculture is a challenge. Farmers take water from the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya to irrigate, vocab word here. Irrigate means to supply water to their crops. The Karakum Desert covers about 70% of Turkmenistan, so water is important. Arid and semi-arid climates also run through the countries of Afghanistan and Pakistan, which you would know if you paid attention to any of the news and saw where some of our troops are at. All right, next climate is continental. In Central Asia, northern Kazakhstan and the mountain valleys of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have a climate that's somewhat cooler and wetter. It's called a continental climate. Farming is much easier here, and Kazakhstan can then export the wheat that's grown on the plains. Let's move on to tropical, and as you can imagine, we're going to move south a little bit here for tropical, because you can find it in India and Bangladesh. They have a mostly humid subtropical or tropical wet or tropical dry climates. Daytime high temperatures can reach 80 degrees even in the cool months, and the most intense heat in May can average more than 100 degrees. We're going to look at the impact of the Himalayas. The Himalayas help regulate the region's climate. They block a lot of the cold, dry air that would otherwise stream into South Asia from the north in the winter. The mountains also draw moisture out of the warm, humid summer winds. That moisture falls as snow in the mountains and rain in the south. In the mountains, high peaks are covered with snow year-round, and glaciers fill many of the valleys in the Himalayas. And the last thing we're going to talk about are the monsoons. I'm sure you guys have heard of these. They are South Asia's seasonal winds. So that's a vocab word. Monsoons are seasonal winds in South Asia. For most of the year, the monsoon blows from the northeast and brings dry air, but then during the wet season, from June to September, the southwest winds bring drenching rain. The warm wind of the southwest monsoon picks up moisture from the Indian Ocean. It dumps heavy rain on India's western coast, the northern plains in the northeast, and on the west coast of India, the western Ghats block this moisture, so the land to the east of the Ghats has a semi-arid climate. Remember we talked about that's called the rain shadow? The southwest monsoon can bring intense storms and floods. In 1988, the flooding in the Ganges and other rivers washed away crops and livestock in Bangladesh and killed about 2,000 people. And then 25% of the population was left homeless. In Afghanistan, however, much of the land stays dry year-round. The southwest monsoon doesn't go that far into this area. So that's Learning Target 1. Go ahead and process your notes and write a summary, and then I will see them very shortly.